Clint Eastwood was playing golf at the Pebble Beach Golf Links on February 6, 2014, when he heard the scream. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. "Help! Someone help! He's drowning!" Clint was on the 18th hole, about to take his final putt. He was 83 years old, older than most men ever get, with knees that ached and a back that reminded him every morning that he wasn't 30 anymore. The smart thing to do would have been to alert the course staff, to let younger, stronger men handle whatever crisis was unfolding. But Clint Eastwood had never been good at doing the smart thing. He dropped his putter and ran toward the voice. What he found when he got there would test every ounce of strength and courage he had left in his aging body. A man was face down in the water hazard on the 16th hole, unconscious, his face submerged, drowning in 3 feet of water, while a crowd of golfers stood frozen on the bank, too shocked or too scared to act. And in the next 60 seconds, Clint Eastwood would do something that proved heroism has no age limit. Something that would save a man's life, but that Clint would refuse to talk about for years, deflecting praise, minimizing the danger, doing what he always did, treating extraordinary courage as if it were nothing more than common sense. This is the story of the day Clint Eastwood became a real-life hero. Not on a movie screen, not playing a character, but as himself. An 83-year-old man who looked at a dying stranger and decided that standing by wasn't an option. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand where it happened. Pebble Beach Golf Links is one of the most famous and exclusive golf courses in the world, perched on the cliffs of Monterey Peninsula overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's where the rich and famous come to play, where Tiger Woods won the U.S. Open, where every hole is a postcard and every round costs more than most people's monthly rent. Clint had been playing Pebble Beach for decades. He lived nearby in Carmel, owned property throughout the area, and treated the course like his personal backyard. Golf was one of his few escapes from the demands of Hollywood, a place where he could just be Clint, not the icon, not the director, just a guy trying to get a ball in a hole. On this particular February afternoon, Clint was playing with 3 friends, all men in their 60s and 70s, all retired, all enjoying the crisp winter air and the stunning views. The weather was perfect, cool but sunny, with just enough wind to make the game interesting. They'd been having a good round, laughing, telling stories, enjoying the rare pleasure of doing absolutely nothing important. They were on the 18th hole, the famous finishing hole that runs along the edge of Carmel Bay, when they heard the commotion from the 16th hole, about 200 yards away. At first, it was just noise, indistinct shouting. But then came that scream, clear and unmistakable. "Help! Someone help! He's drowning!" Clint's friends looked at each other, confused. Drowning? At a golf course? The 16th hole at Pebble Beach has a large water hazard, but it's not deep. Maybe 4 feet at its deepest point. How could someone be drowning in 4 feet of water? But Clint wasn't asking questions. He was already moving, running as fast as his 83-year-old legs would carry him across the fairway toward the sound of panic. His friends called after him. "Clint, wait. Where are you going?" But he didn't stop, didn't slow down. When Clint reached the 16th hole, he found chaos. A group of about 15 golfers and caddies were standing around the water hazard, all of them looking down at something in the water, all of them paralyzed. And there, face down in the shallow water, was a man in his 50s, completely unconscious, his body floating limply, his face submerged. Standing on the bank, screaming, was the man's wife, a woman named Linda. She was hysterical, crying, reaching toward her husband, but not going into the water herself. "Please, someone do something. He's drowning. He's going to die." Clint took in the scene in an instant. The man had apparently been reaching into the water to retrieve his ball when he'd slipped on the muddy bank and hit his head on a rock. The impact had knocked him unconscious, and he'd fallen face first into the water. He'd been under for at least 30 seconds, maybe more, and nobody had moved to help him. Later, Clint would learn why. Most of the people standing there were older, in their 60s and 70s, afraid of slipping themselves. Some were worried about liability, about being sued if they injured the man while trying to help. Others simply froze, shocked into inaction by the suddenness of the emergency. But Clint didn't freeze. He kicked off his golf shoes, stepped into the water, and waded toward the drowning man. The water was cold, shockingly cold, and the bottom was slick with algae and mud. Clint could feel his feet sliding with each step, feel the treacherous instability of the footing that had caused the accident in the first place. When he reached the man, Clint grabbed him by the shoulders and turned him over. The man's face was blue, his lips purple. He wasn't breathing. Clint hooked his arms under the man's armpits and started dragging him toward the shore, fighting against the slippery mud, against his own aging body that was screaming at him to stop, to let someone younger handle this. But there was no one younger. There was just Clint and a dying man, and a choice that had to be made right now. The bank was steep and muddy. Getting the unconscious man out of the water was like trying to climb a wall while carrying a 180-pound sack of concrete. Clint's feet kept slipping. He'd get the man halfway up the bank, and then slide back down, both of them tumbling back into the water. "Someone help me!" Clint shouted at the crowd. "Don't just stand there. Help me get him out." That broke the spell. Two younger men, both caddies in their 20s, rushed into the water and grabbed the unconscious man's legs. Together, the three of them managed to haul him up onto the grass. The man still wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving. His skin had gone from blue to gray. Clint put his ear to the man's mouth, listening for breath, feeling for air movement. Nothing. "Does anyone know CPR?" Clint shouted. Silence. 15 people standing around, and not one of them knew CPR or was willing to admit it. "Call 911. Clint ordered. Now, someone fumbled for a phone. But Clint knew that help was at least 10 minutes away, probably more. The Pebble Beach course was massive, spread out over miles of coastline. Even if paramedics left immediately, they'd need time to navigate the course roads, find the right hole, get their equipment to this location. 10 minutes. This man didn't have 10 minutes. He probably didn't have 2 minutes. Clint tilted the man's head back, pinched his nose, and gave him 2 rescue breaths, just like he'd learned in a water safety class 60 years ago when he was a lifeguard in Oakland. The man's chest rose slightly with each breath. Good. The airway was clear. Then Clint placed his hands on the man's sternum and started chest compressions. 30 compressions, hard and fast. Then 2 more breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Over and over. Clint's arms burned. His back screamed in protest. He was 83 years old, performing one of the most physically demanding emergency procedures there is, and his body was telling him to stop. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, because stopping meant this man died. Sweat poured down Clint's face despite the cool air. His breathing was ragged. His vision started to blur at the edges, but he kept going. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. "Come on," Clint muttered between compressions. "Come on, damn it. Breathe. Breathe." Linda, the man's wife, was kneeling beside them, sobbing. "Please don't let him die. Please. We have grandchildren. We just became grandparents. Please." After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, the man suddenly coughed. Water spurted from his mouth. He gasped, a horrible, rattling gasp, but it was a breath. He was breathing. Clint rolled him onto his side as the man vomited water and bile onto the grass. The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. What happened?" "You hit your head," Clint said, his voice calm despite his own exhaustion. "You fell in the water. You're okay now. Just breathe. Paramedics are on the way." The man looked up at Clint, trying to focus. Who are you?" Before Clint could answer, Linda threw her arms around him, sobbing. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You saved his life. You saved my husband's life." Clint gently disentangled himself from her embrace. Anyone would have done the same thing. But that wasn't true. 15 people had stood there and done nothing. Only Clint had acted. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. They loaded the man, whose name was Steve Galbraith, onto a stretcher and transported him to Community Hospital of the Monterey Peninsula. He'd suffered a concussion and had inhaled some water, but thanks to Clint's quick action, he was going to be fine. Complete recovery. No brain damage, no permanent injury. Steve spent 2 days in the hospital for observation. When he was released, He asked the hospital staff if they knew who had saved him. All he remembered was a tall, older man with white hair and a gravelly voice. The hospital staff made some calls, talked to witnesses at the golf course, and quickly figured out who it was. Steve tried to contact Clint to thank him properly. He called the Mission Ranch Hotel, which Clint owned. He left messages. He tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances. But Clint wouldn't take his calls, wouldn't agree to meet with him. Finally, Steve wrote a letter. He poured his heart into it, thanking Clint for his courage, for his quick thinking, for literally giving him his life back. He sent it to Clint's business office. A week later, Steve received a handwritten note in return. It was brief, just 3 sentences in Clint's distinctive scrawl. "Glad you're okay. Take care of yourself. No need for thanks." That was it. No elaboration. No accepting of praise. Just pure Clint Eastwood, minimizing his own heroism, treating the saving of a human life as casually as he might treat giving someone directions. What's remarkable about this story is how hard Clint worked to keep it quiet. The witnesses at Pebble Beach that day were mostly wealthy, discreet people who respected Clint's privacy. The golf course staff was told not to talk to the media. Steve and Linda Galbraith honored Clint's obvious desire for privacy and didn't go public with their story. As a result, the incident barely made the news. A few local papers ran small stories. "Local man saved at Pebble Beach," with no mention of Clint's involvement. The national media never picked it up. For years, hardly anyone outside of Monterey County knew it had happened. It wasn't until 2016, 2 years after the incident, that the story finally broke nationally. A journalist doing a profile on Clint for his 86th birthday stumbled onto it while interviewing locals in Carmel. When confronted with the story, Clint's response was classic. "It was no big deal," he said with a shrug. "Guy fell in the water. I helped him out. That's what you do." The journalist pressed him. "Mr. Eastwood, you saved a man's life. You performed CPR at 83 years old. Most people would consider that heroic." Clint's expression didn't change. "Most people overthink things. He needed help. I was there. Simple as that. But you could have been hurt. The water was slippery. You could have fallen and hit your head too. At your age." "At my age, I'm still breathing and moving," Clint interrupted. "So I used that to help someone who wasn't breathing and wasn't moving. I don't see what's complicated about it." That response tells you everything you need to know about Clint Eastwood. For him, heroism isn't special. It's not something you do for recognition or praise. It's just what you do when someone needs help and you're capable of helping. It's that simple. Steve Galbraith finally got to meet Clint face-to-face in 2017, 3 years after the incident. They ran into each other by chance at a restaurant in Carmel. Steve approached Clint's table nervously, not wanting to intrude but desperate to say thank you in person. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Steve Galbraith. You saved my life at Pebble Beach." Clint looked up from his dinner and smiled slightly. "I remember. How are you feeling?" "I'm great. Perfect health. And I got to meet my grandson, thanks to you. He was born 6 months after the accident." Clint's expression softened. "What's his name?" "Clint. We named him Clint." For a moment, Clint Eastwood, the man who'd stared down outlaws and bikers and Hollywood executives without flinching, looked genuinely moved. His eyes got a little watery. He stood up and shook Steve's hand. "That's a good name," he said quietly. "You take care of that boy." "I will. Every day, I'll remember what you did." Clint just nodded and sat back down, signaling that the conversation was over. But Steve saw something in his eyes, a flicker of emotion that Clint quickly buried. For just a second, the mask had slipped, and Steve saw the real man underneath. Not the icon, not the legend, just a human being who was glad another human being was alive. That's the real Clint Eastwood story. Not the movies, not the awards, not the fame. It's a story about an 83-year-old man who didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risks, didn't worry about his image or his safety. He just saw someone who needed help and provided it. At an age when most people are retired, spending their days watching TV and taking naps, Clint Eastwood was diving into cold water to save a stranger's life. At an age when most people would be too weak or too scared to perform CPR, Clint was pushing himself to physical exhaustion to keep a dying man's heart beating. And then, after saving that life, he refused to take credit for it, refused to bask in the praise, refused to let it become a story about him. Because for Clint, it wasn't about him. It was about doing the right thing in the moment it needed to be done. That February day in 2014, Clint Eastwood proved something that Hollywood had been trying to capture in movies for decades. True heroism doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't care about age or convenience or personal risk. It just acts. It just does what needs to be done. Today, Steve Galbraith is 61 years old. He's retired, spending his time with his wife, his children, and his grandson Clint. Every February 6th, he goes back to Pebble Beach, stands at the 16th hole, and says a quiet thank you to the man who gave him a second chance at life. And somewhere in Carmel, Clint Eastwood is probably playing golf, or directing a film, or having dinner at his favorite restaurant, completely unbothered by the fact that he's a hero. Because for Clint, that day at Pebble Beach wasn't about being a hero. It was just about being a decent human being. And sometimes, that's the most heroic thing of all.